Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Zoom session of the Dearborn Heights Libraries. Tonight, we present Dr. Robert Breakey, who will be speaking on remaining vital in a pandemic-prone world. Dr. Robert Breakey is a fifth-generation graduate from the University of Michigan Medical School. He completed his family medicine residency at the University of Wisconsin in 1984 and his board certification with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine in October of 2019. He has practiced lifestyle family medicine in Ann Arbor for 35 years. He is the chairman of the board for his multi-specialty medical group, IHA, with over 700 providers caring for over 500,000 patients in Southeast Michigan. He is also the medical director for the IHA William J. Folletti Lifestyle Medicine Institute and the chairman of the board for the Plant-Based Nutrition Support Group, as well as a board member for the National Organization Plant-Based Prevention of Disease, or PPOD. So will you please join Dr. Robert Breakey?
Right. Thank you, Rob. All right. Am I coming through okay, audio? Appreciate everybody coming out on a beautiful summer evening to talk about our coronavirus challenges that we face as humanity. And let me go to share screen here and pull up my slides so that we can go ahead and get started. All right. So again, Rob, thank you so much for the kind introduction and for inviting me to speak with your group tonight. This is certainly a hot topic in the press and throughout the world, with all of us affected by it. It's not new, though. It turns out that back in about, well, let me see why my slides are not advancing here. I apologize. And if we go to this one, see if we can get this to work. I'm sorry, technical difficulties. There we go. First disclosure, I have no conflicts of interest, nothing to sell, just love helping people to experience better health. It was about 10 years ago, one of our grand rounds at our hospital, the speaker came and talked to us about the greatest pandemic of all time, the 1918 Spanish flu. 50 to 100 million people died worldwide. And you see in this news article from October of 1918, churches, schools, theaters closing, and they had wards of people just infected by this flu pandemic that spread worldwide over several years and killed so many millions. His message to us, though, is that even that was not new. Plagues have been happening throughout history, and it was really not if, but when we would see the next pandemic. If you look back in history, the plague of Athens and Justinian, and then the Black Death, where 30 to 60% of the population of Europe perished over a few-year period. The Spanish flu we just talked about. And one thing you'll notice here is that there were several hundred years between these different pandemics. More recently, we've seen the advent of the Asian flu, the H2N2, the Hong Kong flu in 1968. AIDS emerged in 1981, and then SARS, one of the first deadly coronaviruses in 2002. And you'll notice this time that we're talking more measured in a decade or so. For the emergence of these pandemics. And then even more recently, the 2004 avian flu, the swine flu, H1N1, MERS in 2011, Ebola, Zika, and finally COVID-19. Now less than 10 years between these various pandemics. What's going on here? Why are we seeing more severe pandemics and more frequent pandemics? By all accounts, things should be better. We now have sanitation services, water chlorination, sewage treatment plants, a much better understanding of the germ theory. We have vaccines and antibiotics, modern medical care and public health departments. How is it that we are seeing so many more frequent pandemics? Rob, I noticed up in the corner there, instead of seeing me speaking, we see a picture of your library. Is there a way to make me, are other people seeing that too?
I see you.
Oh, you see me? Okay.
I see you up in the corner. I can't speak for others, so.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I saw a picture of the library, but as long as,
Yeah, I see you too, Bob.
okay, thank you.
Oh, now I see the library. Oh, now I see you.
Okay, good. Why are we now in this pandemic-prone world, even though we have vaccines, antibiotics, modern healthcare, public health departments? Well, turns out there's three main reasons for this. And now my screen advance is not working again. Once again, apologize, everybody. We are finding the way to make this work. All right. Let's go to this one. Okay. Now we're going. Okay. So even in spite of all these things we have better, we're finding that pandemics are coming more frequently. Here's when chlorination began back in 1908, and you see the incidence of typhoid death rate plummet within the United States to where it's very rare now, ever since after World War II. So instead, things are worse because we have jets, wild animal wet markets and factory farms, and chronic disease epidemics. Let's look at each of these. Jets now allow us to get anywhere in the world in less than a day. This never happened prior in human history, but it allows viruses to hitchhike on people and get around the world much quicker than ever in the past. And next is these wild animal wet markets and overcrowded factory farms, which become a breeding ground for the viruses that become these pandemics. And we find that most human diseases actually originate in animals. Tuberculosis came from goats, measles and smallpox from cows, whooping cough from pigs, typhoid fever in chickens, ducks brought us influenza, and the AIDS epidemic came from the bushmeat trade and chimpanzees in Africa. Virtually 100% of viruses come and originate from animal hosts. So what about the coronavirus? You've probably heard that originally all human coronaviruses that we know of originate in bats. And 4 out of 7 of these just cause nothing more than a common cold. In fact, that's all we thought they would cause until 2002, when coronavirus underwent some mutations through an intermediate host, the civet cat, and that's caused a very severe illness that was up to 10% fatal in humans who got it. Fortunately, it had a strong initial onset, so we could isolate people that got it before they became highly contagious. We were able to contain that one. The next coronavirus was MERS in 2012, which had an intermediate host of camels, also very deadly, able to transmit human to human, but we could isolate and bring people because it became symptomatic. Virtually 100% got a fever within the first few days before they became highly contagious. So we were able to contain these two, and now 2020, through an intermediate host called a pangolin, which is a scaly anteater mammal, highly traded across China and Asia, became the intermediate host for our COVID-19 virus, which now has, of course, spread around the world. These ground zero for coronavirus wet markets have become all in the news because, again, we recognize that this could be the breeding ground for a next pandemic. They have wild animals stacked on top of each other. It's really pretty horrible by what we would see as standards. This is cultural for them. But lest we look too askance at this, we have our own coronavirus breeding equivalent ground in the form of our factory farms. 5 chickens are kept in cages 18 by 18, or tens of thousands of them in football size areas where they're sitting, walking and sitting in their own feces, beak to beak. Again, an ideal breeding ground for similar kinds of pandemic viruses. In fact, the swine flu did originate right here in the United States. After 1.6 million confirmed cases and about 300,000 deaths, got vaccine and were able to contain that one. But that is an example of where the factory farms have led to a similar breed of these pandemic viruses. Mad cow disease came from cannibalistic feeding practices, where they would take the renderings from slaughterhouses and feed them back to the cows. And the cows developed this, which then, for people eating the meat, could so infect them and lead to this horrible degenerative brain disease. And then the avian flu, H5N1, has not yet easily found its way to transmit human to human, but a few mutations it could, and this one is 50% fatal for those people who have acquired it from chickens. And we have 50 billion plus chicken incubators around the world in these kind of factory farms where it is able to attain mutations, which if it does gain that ability to spread to humans and then human to human, is where our current pandemic could be more of a dress rehearsal. Here's from the CDC how backyard infection or exposure to chicken feces could result in the transmission of the H5N1 virus. We also know that other viruses can come from these factory farms. We know, for example, that many viruses cause cancer, as evidenced by the HPV virus causing cervical cancer in women. And we now know that the bovine leukemia virus, which infects most American cows, may be responsible for cancer now in humans. How do we know this? Well, we thought for a long time it was just a cattle virus that caused leukemia in cows. There was concern because you see that in large factory farm operations, virtually 100% of American cattle are infected with this virus, and still the vast majority even in smaller amounts. But we now know that just like you can look for the viral DNA stitched into cervical cancer cells, you can find within breast cancers cells the bovine leukemia virus DNA stitched within there. So this is strongly associated with diagnosed and histologically confirmed breast cancer, indicating that as many as 37% of breast cancer cases may be attributed to bovine leukemia virus, either from dairy products or eating rare red meats. So it's not just pandemics, it's other diseases, these so-called zoonotic infections that may be responsible for infectious disease and even cancers. In fact, it's in addition, one of my patients wrote in today and said, hey, I ate some shrimp and I think I got 3 days of severe vomiting, diarrhea, fever. And that indeed can come from eating the flesh of animals. In a retail meat survey in 2011, 90% of chicken showed evidence of contamination with fecal matter. It's no fun when you have to scrape this off your windshield, but when you think that the vast majority of chicken sold in retail stores is contaminated with the feces from those chicken, it can give you pause. And it's not just chicken. Ground turkey was found 91% contaminated, ground beef 88%, pork chops 80%. And this is an inevitable part of the processing from animal to meat that in modern processing plants, that part of the animal intestines break open and contaminate the meat. 48 plus million Americans are sickened annually. Tens of thousands are hospitalized and 3,000 plus die from this form of animal foods and infections. To make things worse, many of these bacteria that are on these are resistant to antibiotics, since 80% plus of all antibiotics in America are not given to humans to fight infection. They are fed to farm animals to fatten them faster and to help then increase their profits. This is a practice that is all public health agencies, the American Medical Association, and all are working to stop, and yet the powerful lobbies have been able to continue this practice, leading to antibiotic resistance for some of our most powerful antibiotics. Kind of makes you think back in the 60s, I don't know if you're as old as me, but they taught us how to duck and cover in case of a nuclear war. Well, that wasn't going to be very effective, and neither is the kind of approaches that we've been taking so far to this concern. What we need is a wholesale change in the way we practice our treatment and raising of animals. The American Public Health Association, which is the oldest health professionals in the world, they've called for a moratorium on factory farming for nearly 2 decades now. You can see in its journal published an editorial entitled "Chickens Come Home to Roost" that went beyond calling for de-intensification of pork and poultry industries. They said, "It's curious, therefore, that given the pandemic threat, that changing the way humans treat animals, most basically ceasing to eat them, or at the very least radically limiting the quantity of them that are eaten, is largely off the radar as a significant preventive measure. Such a change, if sufficiently adopted or imposed, would still reduce the chances of a much feared influenza pandemic. It would even be more likely to prevent unknown future diseases that, in the absence of change, may result from farming animals intensively and killing them for food. Yet humanity doesn't even consider this option." I try to think of these things as in medicine, we think of primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. For example, in coronary artery disease, primary prevention is eating a healthy diet. Secondary prevention is after a person's had a heart attack, we give them low-dose aspirin to decrease their chances of clotting. And then tertiary prevention is teaching them through cardiac rehab how they can make the best of what disabilities they may have had as a result of that heart attack. Well, the same kind of approach can be given for pandemics. We already talked about primary prevention by if we were to eliminate factory farms and wet markets, we would find a much less chance that this breeding ground for viruses would result in yet a much more severe pandemic at some point in the future. Secondary, though, is equally important because chronic disease sets the stage for severe coronavirus. The first line of defense, of course, is to prevent exposure. CDC guidelines: wash your hands, avoid touching your face, close contact, wear masks, clean and disinfect. All these are just basic decreasing your chances of being exposed to this virus. But even more important then is to think of a second line as a strong immune system, because this virus is around. You can do your best at all of those measures, and yet you're still going to be exposed. We have to live our lives. We have to get out and get groceries and do things. So the second line of defense is a strong immune system. And this goes not just for coronavirus, but for any. And this is for a handout from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, showing us that by managing stress, by healthy eating, by not smoking, increasing physical activity, a half hour a day of moderate activity, quality sleep, 7 to 8 hours, improves immune function, and connectivity, social interaction also helps to improve immune function. So critical that we do everything we can to make ourselves less susceptible to severe coronavirus. Because basic logic says if COVID exposure plus chronic disease leads to a high risk of severe disease, and we know that 94% of people with death from coronavirus have one or more chronic diseases like coronary artery disease, diabetes, obesity, hypertension, obstructive lung disease. If your goal is to prevent the high risk of severe disease, and you can't entirely avoid COVID exposure because it's out there, then your important part is to avoid chronic disease so that when you are exposed, you'll have a much better chance of having a good outcome. On death certificates, we put down comorbidities, things that are also related to that person's death. And again, in coronavirus, the vast majority had some chronic disease associated with those who die. The third line of defense then becomes avoid those chronic diseases, which make you so much more susceptible. And the cornerstone for obesity, diabetes, coronary artery disease, and hypertension, 4 of the major risk factors for poor outcome with coronavirus, is healthy eating. Other things relate to this as well too, including exercise, sleep, and stress management, but healthy eating is the cornerstone. You can see there they say eat a variety of fiber-filled, this is from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, fiber-filled, nutrient-dense, antioxidant-rich whole plant foods at every meal. A rainbow of vegetables, beans and grains, herbs and spices, and stay hydrated. Obviously too, no smoking. You can avoid 90% of lung cancer and most COPD by not smoking or vaping. And similarly, by avoiding the standard American diet, which now has become the leading risk factor for early death and disability. It used to be tobacco back in 1993, but dietary risk has now surpassed that. Is the change away from the standard American diet. In order to kind of think about what is the optimal human diet, I divide foods into 4 categories. On the left is the animal foods, on the right are plant, and then top are unprocessed and processed on the bottom. So you get the idea. Down here in the corner is hot dogs, cheese, chicken, McNuggets, processed animal foods. And then at least up here, it looks like a steak, an egg, or a glass of milk. Down here is processed plant foods, potato chips, Captain Crunch, olive oil, donuts, etc. And then up here, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans. So let's look at each of these categories. It turns out that industry has hijacked our natural taste for sweetness in real foods and added fat, salt, and sugar to almost anything possible to create a host of addictive foods that are not really food at all. These are designed to addict us, to keep us coming back for more. They're a marketing plan and not really food. So I think with this group, we don't need to spend a lot of time. We can cross off the processed foods. And the question really becomes, are we natural omnivores, or should we be more on the plant side in order to increase our immune function and decrease our risk for chronic disease? Let's explore this some more, but back up a step and say, what is food? In its broadest sense, anything organic is food. This rotting tree stump is food for these maggots and ants. This grass is food for this horse. This chicken is food for this fox. This milk is food for this baby cow. But when you look at it, none of these are human food. None of these are things we should be eating and nourishing with if we define that as that which is health supporting, which decreases our chance of chronic disease and improves our vitality. Tens of thousands of studies now document we can improve our performance, heal injuries, increase health, increase vitality, and longevity by eating foods that are health supporting. So let's think about what makes a food health supporting as we explore animal versus plant. So desirable characteristics are rich in antioxidants, high in fiber, alkalinizing, free of cholesterol, anti-inflammatory, rich in phytonutrients, and balanced set of healthy macronutrients. Let's look through each of these. In a study published back in 2010, they reported on the antioxidant content of more than 3,100 different foods, beverages, herbs, and spices. And you see, you don't need to look through all of them to see a pattern here. The plant foods had an average antioxidant content of over 1,100 versus 18 for animal foods. The plants make these antioxidants to survive the firestorm of photosynthesis. If the animals eat them, they use them up, and we eat the meat, dairy, and eggs, nothing left there. So here's the summary. Diets of animal foods are low in antioxidant content, whereas those on a variety of plant-based foods, especially fruits and vegetables, contain tens of thousands of antioxidant-rich bioactive phytochemicals. Here it is graphically, animal down here, and plant foods way up here. Why is this important? Because in the process of extracting energy from food, it's messy. These free radicals are formed. These are nasty molecules with an unpaired electron that go around and create damage throughout the body. DNA damage can lead to mutations and cancer. Proteins get denatured, setting up immune response and chronic inflammation throughout the body. Endothelial damage, that's the lining of our blood vessels, creates atheroma or plaque, creating heart attacks and strokes. And then cellular damage leading to rapid cell aging and organ dysfunction. These are examples of antioxidants, and there are thousands of others present in plant foods. And come back to our table, we can put a big 5-star here and an X on the animal foods. What about fiber? We say when a woman is pregnant, she's eating for 2. In reality, all the time, all of us are eating for 30 trillion and 1. The 1 is you, who you consider yourself, and the 30 trillion are these healthy microbes that exist largely in your colon, but really throughout your body. It works synergistically with you. And if you feed them well, they support your immune function, hormone balance, they manage toxins and nourish your colon through what are called short-chain fatty acids or butyric acid. These actually provide energy for the colon and then are absorbed and provide energy for your body. And a feedback loop to the brain to say, hey, you can stop eating now. You've closed the loop. You fed yourself, you fed your colony, and if you don't eat the fiber-containing foods, that doesn't happen, and that's one of the risk factors for obesity. They lower inflammation, they produce nutrients, signal satiety, as I mentioned, aid in nutrient absorption. In contrast, if you starve them, you'll get a decreased diversity, and they create inflammation in the colon. They actually produce toxins, especially some of the Bacteroides and Firmicutes. They increase estrogen reabsorption, increase serum cholesterol, create inflammation, and that leads to leaky gut, where components can leak across from the large intestine and increase the risk for autoimmune disease. So what do they eat? Fiber, that is the cell walls left over from plants after you're done. They feast on it and support you in all those ways. The average American only gets about 15 grams of fiber a day. Our poultry dietary guidelines suggest we should be getting twice that. And if you really look at studies of people who thrive best throughout the world and throughout history, you see that really the minimum should be 60 grams and more like 100 plus grams of fiber a day. The way to get that, of course, this is per 2,000 calories if you ate only that food, include beans and vegetables, which are your highest per calorie. Fruits, whole grains, also great sources of high quality fiber. Processed foods like white bread, minimal, and then of course 0 in olive oil and all animal products. So here's your starvation side for your microbiome, and there's your nourishment side. And if you look at population studies, you can see that as the amount of fiber in the diet goes up from 15 grams a day up to about 60, down goes the risk for heart disease, breast cancer, diabetes. And pertinent to today's topic, these are the chronic diseases that make us much more susceptible to COVID-19 if we should get it. So you want to increase the fiber to decrease your chronic disease risk. So we'll put high fiber here and none for animal foods. Alkaline, it's important to present a good acid balance to your kidneys. These hardworking organs are required to keep the blood pH within a narrow range. And to do so, if you eat acid-producing foods, they have to secrete excess acid in the urine. They also have to protect themselves for that. And when you eat things high in acid ash, like fish, pork, poultry, and cheese, with a lack of fruits and vegetables, which can help offset that acid balance puts a huge strain on the kidneys and contributes to chronic kidney disease. When the kidneys aren't working, they're not filtering the toxins, the rest of the body doesn't do well either. So we'll put a big 5-star here for alkalinizing, especially fruits and veggies and beans, and a big X for animal because they do the opposite, they're acidic. Cholesterol-free, if you look at areas of the world where people don't get heart disease, their cholesterols range between 90 and 140. The average American serum cholesterol is 210. And as you probably know, it's not uncommon for us to see people 250, 300 with their cholesterol level. The way to achieve this is through foods that don't contain saturated fat and cholesterol. And that's your plant foods, which are cholesterol-free, and animal foods, which in the fatty portion have large amounts of cholesterol, especially red meats and eggs. Next is really important, that's anti-inflammatory. Plant foods, as we talked about, are anti-inflammatory. They put out that flame of oxidative stress because of rich antioxidants and support for the microbiome. We'll come back to phytonutrients. In contrast, animal foods are pro-inflammatory. They contain bacteria. A quarter pounder can have 100 million bacteria on it, and these mostly die in cooking, but not before they form what are called endotoxins that go out throughout the body and create inflammation. Heme iron is another one, especially in red meats and shellfish. We'll come back to that. And then arachidonic acid is a substance our own bodies use to instigate the inflammatory cascade when you need it for acute inflammation. So you get a cut or step on a splinter, you want that to bring in white blood cells and blood flow to help with the healing process. But arachidonic acid is also present in animals, especially chicken and eggs. So when you eat those foods, you're eating inflammation, you're inciting inflammation throughout the body. And then finally, carnitine and choline, which are present in meat and eggs respectively, metabolize to trimethylamine oxide, bad actor that goes throughout the body, setting up chronic inflammation. Let's look at a little more detail at heme iron. As you look at that per 1 milligram in the diet, the incidence of diabetes goes up 16%, heart disease 27%, stroke, cancer of several types. And this, again, is a result of the, at least in part of the pro-oxidant effect from this heme iron. And it's not hard to get a milligram. As I mentioned, shellfish have several per 3 ounce portion. And it's not uncommon for people to eat a quarter pounder or more, a large steak, and get 10 milligrams in just from beef or lamb. So this heme iron is another example of a pro-inflammatory effect from animal foods. This is an important concept that this chronic inflammation throughout the body sets us up for a host of chronic diseases, which are then increases your risk if you should get viral infections. So we'll put a big 5-star for anti-inflammatory on the plant and animal foods being pro-inflammatory. Next is rich in phytonutrients. We think of foods as the major macronutrients, proteins, carbs, and fats, and the 10 or 15 vitamins and minerals, but there were 30,000 plus phytonutrients that we're only beginning to understand the importance. The bioflavonoids in citrus, lycopene in tomatoes, phytates in beans, carotenoids in carrots and sweet potatoes, that have a host of functions to support immune function, to assist us in every aspect of fighting cancer and support cellular function. By definition, phyto means plant, so these are only present in plant foods. They're not optional, they're essential to our vitality and well-being, and they're only present in plants, so we'll put a 5-star here and an X here. And then finally, balanced macronutrients. Everybody focuses on the macronutrients, and we really don't just eat protein, fat, or carbs, but we do look at the components of foods. And optimally, if you look at areas of the world of the blue zones, people should be getting about 80% of their calories from unrefined carbohydrates. That's not white bread, white rice, and sugar. That's from unrefined carbohydrates. In contrast, the animal foods don't have carbs or fat and protein. But it's even more important than that because the protein source makes a big difference. We already talked about how animal proteins are more acidic because of a higher content of the 2 sulfur-containing amino acids, cysteine and methionine. So they're more acidic, they're more allergenic, especially dairy and eggs are the 2 leading causes of food allergy. They're pro-inflammatory, increasing inflammatory cytokines and stimulating a hormone called IGF-1 that fans the flames of cancer. In contrast, plant proteins are much healthier for humans because of their the opposite effects. Fats also, we mentioned animals are the only ones containing cholesterol, much higher content of saturated fats. They also naturally contain trans fats. These are the ones that the FDA banned in processed foods because they're linked with heart disease and cancer, but they still naturally occur in animal muscle. They're also much higher in heavy metals and contaminants, especially for fish, whereas the opposite true for plant sources of fat. The exception being coconut and palm oils, which are high in saturated fats. Really best not to have any oils or refined ones. That's why we talk about whole food. And then finally, the carbs animal have pretty much none except milk, which has sugar, lactose, which is very common food intolerance. It should be. Animals don't need milk after infancy and therefore don't need the milk digestive enzyme. They also have no fiber, whereas the plants are a much healthier source of carbs that should be the majority of our calories. So we come back here to good source of protein versus counterproductive fats and carbs, same thing. And that brings us back to our main table with a 5-star here and an X over here. Are we noticing a pattern here? Is this just coincidence that the plant foods are rich in these health supporting characteristics and the animal foods are quite the opposite? No, this is what our ancestors evolved on. They were not hunter-gatherers, they were gatherer-hunters. Now and then they might have small amounts of animal foods, but if you look at even modern day hunter-gatherers, look at the archaeologic record, you'll know, we understand now that our ancestors evolved on a rich variety of plant foods, just like our closest relatives now. And that's why these are health supporting for us. This is our summary then, health supporting versus not for the animal foods. And we can go back and complete our table here, showing that a whole food plant-based diet featuring the new 4 food groups is really the way to best avoid chronic disease and support immune function, and therefore keep up with our, keep from getting severe effects of COVID-19 should we get it. It's not just the chronic diseases that are important for COVID-19 though. Others, including arthritis, osteoporosis, chronic kidney disease, several cancers, Alzheimer's, are also related to these so-called diseases of affluence, which really should more aptly called foodborne chronic disease. Just like we talked about foodborne disease in the form of salmonella, campylobacter, shigella, we should talk about foodborne chronic disease in terms of these, which are largely preventable through good diet. An ounce of prevention is much more than a pound of cure, and we learned this with the seatbelts. As the seatbelt laws came in from 88 to 92, up went seatbelt use and down came fatality rates from auto accidents. Same thing with lung cancer. This is lung cancer rates in men going up and up and up. Sorry, the red is the cancer rates as smoking rates continue to go up with a lag period. And then it reached the peak in 1963 at the Surgeon General's report. And as smoking rates have now declined to less than 20% of adults, our lung cancer rates are also dropping precipitously. So let's come back to our COVID-19. All of this is very important because part of what we're seeing now is that although in the world, and this is as of yesterday, 15.4 million cases of coronavirus, 4.1 million or 27% have occurred in the US. Of all the deaths, we have 23% of the deaths from coronavirus, but we only have 4% of the population. What's going on here? Are we just that much worse at wearing masks? Well, maybe, and that's part of it. Obviously, it's multifactorial, but a big part of it too is we have some of the highest chronic disease rates, the highest rates of obesity, which is a significant risk factor due to the coronavirus attaching itself easily to fat cells. And we have some of the highest rates of high blood pressure, chronic kidney disease, expected to already affecting a third of people, diabetes, 48 million. So all of this provides a fertile ground for coronavirus to not only spread, but create havoc. And therefore, what we need to do is move ourselves out of that by decreasing our chronic disease burden. Because really what we're looking at here is not just what we're seeing now. This is the CDC pandemic categorization, and it's much like the hurricanes categories 1 through 5. And you can see down here that the coronavirus is sort of a category 2-3 with a death rate somewhere between 0.1 and 0.5. The 1918 flu had a 2% mortality rate. That was our only category 5 one we've seen in recent history. But if we should get a virus like the H1N1 that learns human-to-human transmission and gets a 10 or even more higher mortality rate, that's when we are really in trouble. So it's time to really pay close attention to how we care for ourselves, our animals, to help prevent this. I mentioned that cardiovascular disease is now 1/3 of all US deaths, diabetes and prediabetes affecting over 84 million, approaching 50% of the population for diabetes and prediabetes, hypertension, 1 in 3 adults, and then obesity affecting, if you look at 28 or greater BMI, that leads to where you have a 6-fold increased risk of severe COVID-19. So this fertile ground, because of all our chronic disease, is literally killing us as Americans. Standard American diet is about 57% processed foods, 32% of the calories from animal, and only 11% whole food plant-based. SAD acronym is appropriate here. Remember, we talked about how we really should have the vast majority of your diet being these whole plant-based foods for optimal health. The Power Plate, put out by Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, really summarizes that other end of the extreme. We want to really get your food, your nourishment from whole plant foods. If your percent of calories down in the SAD diet, it puts you in a red zone of exciting and accelerating chronic disease. As best we can tell, the farther you move along this line, the better. So the USDA, DASH, Mediterranean, Pritikin move along the pathway there to at least improved outcomes. But if you really want to fully prevent and even reverse chronic disease, you're looking more at the 95 to 100% of whole food plant-based. We don't know the exact shape of this curve, but we do know that as your percent of your diet goes up, whole food plant-based, down goes your risk of chronic disease. It's not just genetics or aging or bad luck. It's largely within our hands. 60 to 70% is due to lifestyle metrics over which we have control. And that should be good news for everybody who doesn't want to get coronavirus or end up with chronic disease. Let me give you an example of one of my patients, a 40-year-old guy, came in December of 2015. His hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of diabetes control, ideal is less than 5.7. Greater than 7 is out of control diabetes. He was 11.7. His fasting blood sugar should be less than 100. It was 287. Cholesterol, we mentioned, ideally should be 150, but at least less than 200. And his triglycerides normal is 150. His macroalbumin was elevated, indicating early kidney damage from his diabetes. And I gave him an ultimatum. I said, it's time to either go on insulin or a whole food plant-based diet. He said, Doc, I don't like needles. I'm going to do the diet. Well, to his credit, he did. And 4 months later, he came back with a normal A1C. His fasting blood sugar dropped over 180 points. His cholesterol dropped almost 100 points. Triglycerides almost 600. And his macroalbumin came down to within the normal range, less than 30. So he reversed his diabetes. He greatly improved his risk, decreased his risk for heart disease, strokes, high blood pressure, and a host of other diseases just from his diet. Well, what's going on here? We know in type 2 diabetes that the insulin is ineffective and the sugar builds up in the bloodstream. The cells are then starving in the face of plenty. And this is partly why diabetics are so susceptible to severe COVID-19 outcome. Their cells aren't getting the energy they need to fight it off, to support immune function, to take care of normal bodily functions because they're starving. What's gumming up the locks there and preventing that insulin signaling from happening turns out to be fat. Intramyocellular lipid from saturated fat, in particular, eggs, dairy, meats, chicken and fish, that's gumming up the works. So a lot of people come to me, they say, well, I don't want to get diabetes, so I don't eat sugar. I said, well, good for you. Sugar makes it worse when you have diabetes, but it's not the root cause. Dr. Barnard goes over this well in his book, Reversing Diabetes. And in fact, you have to be a little careful. These lifestyle changes can work so well that if you're on blood pressure or diabetes meds, you have to work closely with your doctor because you get better fast enough and then the meds push you too low and you get in trouble. So the US per capita chicken intake back when I was born was about 12 pounds per person. Along came the Colonel, it's over 50 pounds per person per year. And they've obesified chickens as well. We talked about the factory farms and genetic breeding. They're 4 times the size in it. Chicken breast used to have about 2 to 3 grams of fat, now over 20 grams of fat, and mostly saturated fat. Cheese also started out back here at when I was born, about 7 pounds per person, and over 30 pounds of cheese, which is 70% fat, largely saturated fat, high in cholesterol. So the diabetes, if we overlay increase in diabetes in our country, we now have a much better idea that it's the fat causing this, and a key take-home point that chicken and cheese, because of the amounts of saturated fat and the amounts that people are now eating, are key drivers of our diabetes epidemic and therefore of our COVID-19 mortality rates. A large number of people that have died from coronavirus have diabetes. But diabetes isn't even, it's about number 9 on leading causes of death. Now it contributes to many of these others, so this is a little bit skewed, but heart and circulatory disorders really are the larger than any of the others. And this is due to a buildup of plaque in the arteries, which is needless. It need not happen. If you've seen the documentary Forks Over Knives, you saw Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, and he says coronary artery disease is a benign foodborne illness which need never exist or progress. Now that we know the cause for this is the standard American diet, we can change that and have an end to heart disease if we so choose. Here's an artery of a 43-year-old surgeon from the Cleveland Clinic, and you see 3 years later, opened back up, reversed his coronary artery disease. They didn't even teach that was possible in medical school. Paul Chatlin, the founder for the Plant-Based Nutrition Support Group, is a great example of this. If you go to pbnsg.org, you can read his story. I'll come back to that in a minute, but he reversed his heart disease through whole food plant-based diet. And then this is Dr. Kim Williams, the chair of cardiology and immediate past president of the American College of Cardiology. His famous quote is, there are 2 kinds of cardiologists in the world, those who are vegan and those who haven't read the data. The data is overwhelming that our diets are killing us. So general principles, though, it's not all or nothing. There's no threshold effect. There's no safe amount. Starting out eating animal or processed foods gives some incremental increase in your risk. And yet the more you do, the greater you gain. Early you start, the better, but it's never too late. I got one 84-year-old guy who went plant-based, reversed his high blood pressure, obesity, improved his arthritis, overall health. So go for it wherever you're at. Kaiser, the insurance company, now says physicians should consider recommending a plant-based diet to all their patients, especially those with high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, or obesity. And according to this study by the National Academy of Sciences, if the world all went vegan, we could save 8.1 million human lives per year, and over 1 million in the Western countries alone, just by making that change. And beyond that, it's not just absence of disease. I take care of people every day, and those come in eating plant-based, feel the vitality, the life to do what they want to do, the independence, the freedom from medications. They perform better. It's just a whole new way of life. Beyond that, too, there's the effect on the biosphere. we live on this planet Earth where if it were shrunk to the size of a basketball, the entire biosphere within which all known life in the universe exists would be the thickness of a sheet of plastic. And we're not treating it very well. This is our lifeboat, drilling holes in it. Every day eating whole food plant-based saves 1,100 gallons of water, 45 pounds of grain instead of feeding it to the animals, 30 square feet of forest. I thought what's happening in the Amazon now is a crime with the clearing it for raising cattle and growing grain for cattle. 10 pounds of carbon dioxide for every day for every person, and then one animal's life. These are averages. So it's not just saving ourselves and improving our resistance to pandemics, it's saving our vehicle to our Earth. So key take-home points. We think of the 3 stages of cancer. We know there are 3 stages of cancer. One is where a cell undergoes a mutation. This is an irreversible stage where it turns cancerous, and that could be from radiation, toxicity, or virus. The next stage is the promotion, where that cancer grows and divides and develops new blood vessels and grows locally. And then the third stage is metastasis, where it spreads to distant parts of the body, and that's the part that it really is, makes it deadly. Well, we can think of the same thing with respect to 3 stages of a pandemic. The incite stage is a viral mutation that occurs within an animal, usually chicken or pigs. In the case of coronavirus, the bat to the pangolin, where that viral mutation that allowed it the ability to spread to humans. And then once there, it gains the ability through further mutations to spread human to human. That incite stage is that mutation. The promotion stage is where it finds fertile ground among a population of humans that have a high incidence of chronic disease. And then the metastasis is that social spread stage. So if we look back at these and with a prevention eye in mind, we would eliminate factory farms and wet markets to decrease that chances that next mutation is going to bring forth the virus that will spark our next even more severe pandemic. We will adopt a whole food plant-based lifestyle and avoid smoking to avoid the chronic diseases that make us and our populations so susceptible to a coronavirus and create much more severe disease. And then finally, if we don't do those things, we just have to stay home. You can see nobody's really a big fan of that one. So much better to move upstream and work in the first 2 stages to really make a big difference here. Additional resources, make sure you watch Forks Over Knives. And I think Rob is recording this, so you don't have to write all these down, but great resources that we'll see where you can learn more. Plant-Based Nutrition Support Group at pbnsg.org is a great resource and support systems with cooking classes, world-class speakers. Dr. Michael Greger at nutritionfacts.org. And recently, I should say his book from 2015, How Not to Die, is really the best I've seen for a lifestyle medicine approach to avoiding chronic disease. And now more recently, his new book, How to Survive a Pandemic, came out and is available. And he covers a lot of what I've covered here in even more detail on both his website for coronavirus videos and even more detail within the book. And then finally, the PPOD conference starts tomorrow. You're just in time if you are interested in seeing world-class speakers like Dr. Kim Williams. I mentioned Sarai Stanzik reversed her multiple sclerosis, infectious disease doc from New Jersey, and she'll be speaking. So world-class speakers, which has been held in Raleigh for many years and now virtual in 2020, so open to everybody, starting tomorrow at noon and running through Sunday evening. Go to p-pod.org to register. And by the way, I know a lot of you have plans already for this weekend. It's a nice summer weekend, but they're going to record the conference. And as long as you're signed up for it, you'll have, after about 10 days, they'll be posting all of the talks and you'll be able to watch them again. or for the first time, if you had to miss one or two, all the way through November 29th, they'll be posted for conference registrants. So a great resource for learning more from some of the world's best experts in this field. Make sure to also watch the Game Changers, James Cameron movie, and excellent overview of how whole food plant-based diet can improve performance for athletes and enhance immune function. It's on Netflix now. And finally, finish with my favorite quote. When you have your health, you have 1,000 dreams, and when you don't, you have just one. And this is where I get my passion for this, because I see people every day who've lost all their other dreams because they've lost their health. So often it's because things that could have been prevented. And in contrast, I see people who have maintained, have gained their health back, have reversed their disease, come in smiling off their meds, feeling free, happy, and independent to do the things they love to do. This is my wife and I in Italy, looking out over the Mediterranean Sea. And I like to rollerblade, I like to ski fast, and do a boogie board and scuba dive. I like to enjoy all that life has to offer. So I think it's important to think both avoidance of disease and positive wellness as you make your decisions every day on how you take care of this priceless thing called yourself, your body. So with that, Rob, I'll go back to stop share and see if we have some questions. Thank you all for your attention here today, and I appreciate you. Let's see what questions we have. If you want to, we've got a small enough group that I think you could just unmute yourself or type a question. Colleen, you look like you're thinking of a question. Or not, that's okay.
Well, I was thinking to say thank you so much. This was a lot of information to take in. I appreciate it. And we just had a meeting for the Citizens for Peace, and we had Tom Proger and Kim Corona as speakers. Yeah. And it's on our citizensnumber4peace.org website. And this was just the perfect follow-up to that. My husband does the shopping and all the cooking, and we just tried Impossible Burgers for the first time, and they're delicious. I would recommend those to everyone. But my question to you is, I was just diagnosed with kidney cancer that metastasized to my liver. And I don't believe, I mean, I try to eat a healthy diet. Everyone can do better. But is there any way to reverse cancer once it's metastasized?
That's a challenge. You know, we can never guarantee that, and obviously everybody's unique or individual. Right. What I can say is that follow your doctor's advice. You know, there may be some things there. Don't look for magic supplements on the internet. There may be things there that they can help you to offer. But you also should set the stage for a strong immune system. Yeah. Regardless of what the things they choose to try to help fight your cancer, there may be small cells that have broken off and go into other parts of your body as well. And the only way to find those and search them out is the smart bombs called your immune system, which can recognize cancer cells. So a strong immune system, with what we talked about, a high fiber diet, whole, rich, antioxidant rich foods is very important. There are also certain foods that seem especially immune supportive when it comes to cancer, especially mushrooms. Make sure to cook your mushrooms, berries and greens, especially greens, lots and lots of kale and collards and broccoli, Brussels sprouts. These foods are almost, Dr. Esselstyn has his heart patients eat them times a day. A little bit of boiled kale with some vinegar on there, literally, to help bathe their cells in phytonutrients. And there's a particular one in there called sulforaphane which seems to be a potent anti-cancer fighter. So lots and lots of greens. In addition, you want to strictly avoid all animal protein. Protein stimulates that hormone called IGF-1, hormone that is a growth hormone. The only time we're really supposed to have animal protein in our diet is right after we're born with mother's milk. And that protein stimulates that IGF-1 and we grow triple our birth weight in the first year. It's a good thing then. But when you eat animal protein as an adult, it interprets that as, oh, what happened? I went back to infancy. It's growth time. And it puts out this hormone that's like kerosene on a fire, increased genesis, which is blood vessel growth to help cancer cells grow faster, increases their multiplication rate, gives them the cloaking ability to evade the immune system. It's a horrible way. The second is to avoid white sugar. And the reason is that cancer cells are not as well organized as regular cells, so they can't extract as much energy per sugar molecule. They can split that sugar one time and get 4 units of energy versus 36 that regular cells can get. So they need a lot kind of higher concentration of sugar to get the energy they need. And if you're feeding them Milky Way bars and cotton candy and Wonder Bread, which essentially turns into sugar right away, you're giving them the fuel that they need. So avoid animal protein and sugar, eat your greens, mushrooms, berries, whole food, plant-based, high fiber, and you'll put the odds at least in your favor. But good for you for making the changes, for understanding that you're not going to just take this lying down, you're going to do everything to help yourself.
Thank you so much for that advice. And it's good for everyone too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. In Dr. Greger's book, How Not to Die, there are several pertinent chapters, breast and prostate cancer chapters, the GI chapter, because he talks about colon, pancreatic cancer. And it's kind of general for several, that the same principles apply. And the blood cancers, leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma turn out to be also largely diet related. So, look that up if you have.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, all the best to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, others?
Bob?
Yeah.
Alberto left, but he said before he left, superb lecture, Bob. Thanks for your hard work to bring this to all.
Okay. Yes, Alberto's a family physician, good friend of mine up in Brighton. I gave him a copy of How Not to Die, I think 3 or 4 years ago. Being a smart guy, he read it cover to cover, took it to heart, and went with me. He was my down in Orlando to take our lifestyle medicine boards last October. So he now practices whole food, plant-based lifestyle medicine up in Brighton, and a world-class musician too, a bongo player. He's out there spreading the word. Thank you, Alberto, even though you had to go. I appreciate your support, and you're helping us to spread some health.
I have a question here.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about olive oil?
Yeah, great question. A lot of times people think of olive oil as a health food, as something that gives you healthy fats. It's only healthy when compared with saturated fats and animal foods, but it's not a health food. And let's explore why. Number one is the calorie density. It's pure fat. It's 4,000 calories per pound versus 100 for vegetables. So 40-fold the calorie density. So that means that a big pound of salad with 1 tablespoon of olive oil on it, you just made that 60% fat. Like, no, wait a minute, it's 98% vegetables and I just put a little bit, 2% fat. When you look at calorie density, you're increasing that amount. So for people who are trying to watch their weight, trying to not have too much extra that they're eating, you don't want to have pure fat in your diet. The second is it's actually pro-inflammatory. And now olive oil is better than other oils like corn oil or canola oil. or the worst of all, coconut and palm oils, which are very high in saturated fats. So on a scale of things, but it's not healthy, being pro-inflammatory. The ratio of the what are called omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids can create inflammation in our system. And you really want to have your fats in the form of more omega-3s from ground flaxseed, ground chia seed, some walnuts in their more whole food form. The third thing, a good analogy is to think of it kind of like the white sugar effect. If you eat a beet, most sugar from our area comes from sugar beets. When you eat that whole beet, you're getting protein and phytonutrients and things that metabolize to nitrate that open your nitric oxide, that open your blood vessels. You're getting fiber. You're getting all that great food has to offer. But when you extract out the sugar, when you take out just sucrose from that, you're getting empty calories. Your body's getting calories without the good stuff to help make use of it. Same thing here, when you take an olive, which is most of its calories from fat, but you remove the olive matrix, which is the fiber and the protein and whatever other nutrients it has, you have essentially empty calories in the form of just the oil that came from that fat, or just the soy oil, or just the corn oil, whatever kind of oil you've got. The reason part of this confusion came up is that the Mediterranean diet got such press diets. And the reason for that is it is way healthier than the standard Western diet or the standard American diet. It does contain fish, olive oil, and some cheese and dairy products. So people looked at it and said, wow, look, these people on the American diet, a third of them die of heart attacks. They get strokes and high blood pressure and diabetes. All these people on the Mediterranean diet, it's only 10%, it's much less. This diet must be the best diet. Now, everything's relative. So yes, when you take all that fat, salt, sugar, and only 10%, 11% whole food plant-based in the standard American diet, and you replace it with a diet that's rich in fruit and vegetables, whole grains, and a small amount of olive oil, fish, and dairy products, these people do much better. But that doesn't mean everything about this diet is optimal, is the best. Does that make sense? There's a chart there that standard American diet, USDA, Mediterranean, Pritikin, you go down a continuum. And what I would say is for a lot of people, just going to Mediterranean diet and including some olive oil is a great step in the right direction. And yet if you're really looking to reverse a chronic disease, whether it's heart disease, obesity, high blood pressure, cancer, you really need to go more all in, to go to optimum. It's also eliminating the oils. But once again, it depends on your goals and where you're starting from. Certainly olive oil, I would call it the least worst of the oils.
So is there a substitute, or do you just say eliminate it?
Oh, yeah, great question.
Olives.
For stir frying, you would just use a little bit of either vegetable broth or water or white wine, or often you don't need anything at all. Put the mushrooms in there, you'll be surprised how the moisture from them makes it go, and keep them moving. There are a lot of good online cooking classes that'll show you how to stir fry without oil. The second is on your salads. A lot of people use oily dressings or olive oil. Boy, I just use plain vinegar. The 18-year balsamic is amazing in its flavor, and there are dozens of flavored kinds of vinegars. You can make your own dressings with a hummus apple cider dressing. Use some low salt salsa. Have part of your meal be kind of the dressing that goes with it. Often I'll have a lentil stew or soup and just
That's a good idea.
so that becomes the dressing. So you don't really need oil for anything. And I think Heather chimed in there. If you're looking for olive oil, eat the olives.
Well, if you cut them and put them on your salad, that's like,
That's right.
like with a little avocado, it kind of makes the salad fatty, like you were looking for with the olive oil.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Good. They are a little high in salt, so if you're watching your blood pressure,
Sorry.
don't have too many.
Listen to me. Don't
No,
listen
no,
to me.
no, no. I'm just saying, don't overdo it. But yes, that's a good general principle. Much better to eat the olive than the olive oil. Much better to eat the corn than the corn oil. The whole food is a key part of this. It's not just, and I should mention that a lot of people are vegan, and that's great. Many of them for ethical reasons, but you can easily be a junk food vegan. You know, Oreos, Coca-Cola, French fries, potato chips are vegan, but supporting. Oh, you don't need to hide, Heather. But they're not health supporting. So remember all parts of the quadrant: plant-based on the right and whole foods on the top, and you do your body a favor.
So thank you for that. And the good news is on salads, I always eat them dry. No
There you
dressing.
go.
Wow, that's awesome. I wish I could do that.
Mhm.
That is amazing.
Oh, my
Only so
wife,
few people do that.
my wife says, tell him we're both vegans.
Excellent. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Other questions?
Well,
Right.
I wrote down what I wanted to say. I wanted to say thank you for, so I'm going to read it, for doing all the work and the dedication, the presentation. I'm so grateful. I learned a lot. I want to watch it again. I think you said how to do that, but tell me later, because I want to get through what I wrote. I think it should, you could expand this into a docu-series. I could raise money for you. No, but I think you need to make it like, it was so much. I like to think I'm smart, but it was so much for me. I was left behind a lot. Like maybe it's because I'm not that healthy. I mean, I have autoimmune conditions. Sometimes I get brain fog. You know, I'm not sure if I'm pre-diabetic, like, or it's ADHD, but I lost a lot of it. I couldn't.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
I couldn't
get
keep
excited.
up. No, I loved it, but I would like it to be like made like maybe for 9th grade or 10th grade with animation, because I want to see the little microbiome eating the fiber. That's like amazing. That 30,001 where you're the one and the 30,000.
Are you going to help me with this project?
Yeah, I will raise the money.
Okay.
But you have to hire microbiologists and animators and graphic art design and make it like where I want to see the cancer cell. You were talking about it's eating sugar, this and that, but I want to see the animation of that little character and the sugar, because I cannot picture what you're saying, but I'm interested. But what happens is I lose it and then I can't learn.
Well,
It's just,
thank you for the feedback. I know I talk fast sometimes. Use the jargon.
It's not you.
Rob said that it is recorded, so you'll be able to play me.
Okay. Yeah, how do I see it again?
Rob, do you have the info for where this will appear on the?
I am Rob's colleague. His computer froze up, so I'm just going to let you know how you can log into this. You can visit our website at www.mishlibrary.org. And if you go to the bottom of the homepage, you'll see our links to our YouTube page, which is where all these will be posted.
Cool, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Can you type out that website too in the chat?
Oh yeah, sure, good idea. Thank you.
Okay.
I have to.
Oh yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I just thought it was so great. Thank you so much for doing this. I have to go. Can I go now? Like, do I just?
Absolutely. Just push leave meeting. You'll be fine.
Okay.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm trying to do it. No, I'm not.
Any other questions? All right. If you're trying to talk, you're muted. And if you're all set, we'll all go enjoy a little more of this rest of this beautiful summer.
Time for a walk.
Yes, it's a good time for that.
Thank you.
And in addition, I know Rob has had me back a couple other times, so I'm sure at some point in the future I'll be back. We can cover the next topic and move on from there. So thank you all this evening. I appreciate you. Go forth and be healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. Oh, here it is.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.